Hello, hi. Welcome to LFP Live Behind the Story with myself. I'm Patrick Maloney. I'm a digital editor at the London Free Press, and with me is my colleague Randy Richmond, who recently named Canada's top reporter at the National Newspaper Awards, which is the first time anyone at the Free Press has done that. And so that's what, 25 people in the last quarter century. It's a pretty incredible achievement. So Randy, how you doing?
I'm great. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good here in the Oak Ridge Bureau. So we have people still trickling in to attend. A quick note, we would love to be able to have something more interactive where you could send us in live questions and things of that nature, but we've seen enough and heard enough stories about events like this or organized talks like this where it gets hacked or it gets attacked or whatever, that we kind of locked everything down. So I'm sorry if that's a little frustrating, but you did have an opportunity to send some questions in when you registered. We appreciate that, and we're going to get around to asking all those questions as we went through the next half hour. So thank you again for joining us. We started to do these live events as an effort to sort of strengthen our connection with the community and maybe add a new dimension to some of our stories. And that started about a year ago. We've done 3 or 4 so far. And of course, we had many more planned until COVID-19 and the pandemic canceled all those plans. So this is our first virtual LFP live event. And today the topic, of course, is We Are the Cops, which was Randy's 6-part series that we published last fall. An amazing piece of journalism that's drawn acclaim across the country and, of course, earned him national honors, which is something he richly deserved, and we're all very happy to see that. But it also reflects, you're not doing it for the awards, but it reflects the caliber of the work and the importance of the series and the importance of the story in general. We're going to get into that talk in a couple of minutes. I just want to give people a few more minutes opportunity to log in. Again, if you gave us a question when you registered, we will definitely be asking. I will definitely ask Randy that question in the next half hour. And if I can add to Dahlia, our colleague Rachel is sort of, she's running this whole show for us, and we're so grateful for her technical expertise and her help. And I would expect that in the little chat function that you'll see on your, you should be able to see on your screen eventually, she's going to put in there a link to the series. And if you haven't read it, or maybe you haven't read it in a while, it's a 6-part series. Like I said, it's an outstanding bit of journalism. It's a great bit of local journalism. And I think it's worth your time. I would definitely say that. It's definitely worth your time. And we're hopeful that this is the first of several events that we're going to be holding. Maybe some with Randy, maybe with other reporters. We're not sure yet. As I say, there is a renewed focus, I think, lately on policing issues, of course, in the last week. And it's sort of a coincidence that that would be happening just as we were holding this event, where we're going to focus on a series that was on that very topic. So with that, Randy, I will say this. We Are the Cops was a 6-part series, a huge effort by you journalistically, a huge undertaking editorially from the newspaper. We've worked together for almost 20 years. The best thing I've ever seen in our newspaper by a mile in terms of just its importance, the professionalism of it, the quality of the journalism, the importance of it. And, there's nothing sort of less impressive than an award-winning journalist, right? You hear that all the time, but to win, you might win the Crime Stoppers Media Award and you're an award-winning journalist, but to be named Canada's top reporter at the National Newspaper Awards is something that just stops you cold. It is a great honor. And what's that like? What was that like?
It was a bit of a shock, a surprise, of course. Of course, it was done online this time because we couldn't gather together as we usually do to celebrate journalistic accomplishments. But it was a surprise because, and it's not false modesty, but there's a lot of great journalism done every year in Canada. And this was, a very local story with some implications for other areas. Obviously, when we talk about that had a lot of context from across the country, but the actual incident was so local that I was surprised that it got that kind of recognition. Obviously happy, and So Emily was happy to hear about it too.
Mhm.
I think you always worry that people think you're just exploiting them for awards, and that's not the case. It's as you say, they're great to get. That's not why we do them. And as you say, eventually you stay in this long enough, we're all award-winning journalists sooner or later.
Not like that though. So everyone, you'll see in the chat box, you'll see a link to the series, and please, I encourage you to read it after we're done here if you haven't read it yet or you haven't read it in a while. Let's start at the beginning, Randy. Three main people in this story. There's the one we call Emily. There's Sergeant Peter Paquette, and there's a defense lawyer, Craig Mclean. Describe this story to me. What was We Are the Cops about?
Well, basically, Emily was arrested in September of 2016. She had been drinking and was suspected of mischief, of breaking a window, brought into the London police station on Dundas Street. And in the booking unit, in that area where you see on TV, where you stand in front of the counter and talk to the sergeant, she was brought in, and the sergeant on duty was Sergeant Peter Paquette. And that intersection of those two lives led to the whole incident, to the whole story. Craig Mclean, of course, is the lawyer that she got later. So just to run through this sort of really quickly, she was in the police station. She sort of kicked out with her feet at one point. She was in and out of sort of coherence and consciousness. Her reaction to kind of waking up and kicking out her feet, that brought Sergeant Paquette, and he basically assaulted her for off and on for about 5-6 minutes. Like, he kicked her back, and he punched her, and he stepped on her, and he kind of stomped on her, and he jammed his forearm into her neck and stepped on her jaw area. You know, that day though, she is charged with assaulting police officers. She goes off the court system. She's about to take an early plea when somebody in her family says, "Hey, I know a lawyer named Craig Mclean." Craig Mclean, like Craig Mclean, immediately a veteran, a wily veteran lawyer, well regarded in London, smells something wrong, that this little waif of a woman named Emily comes into his office and is charged with assaulting these officers, and he smells something right off the bat. And of course, it goes on for a while, but eventually he fights and fights and fights the Crown's office to get video surveillance from that police station. When that video surveillance comes out 6 or 7 months later, it shows that in fact Emily was assaulted. Her charges are gone. Sergeant Paquette is charged, and in December of 2017, I believe, he pleads guilty to 1 count of assault. That's kind of the basics of what happened, how those three people interacted.
And the title of the series, of course, We Are the Cops. There's this exchange, one of several exchanges between Emily and Paquette, captured on video, when she's in when she arrives at the police station. She says, "Why are you punishing me? Why are you doing this? Call the effing cops and let it go." Sergeant Paquette responds, "We are the cops."
Yeah.
Your call to make that the title of the series. What does that sentence say to you? What does that response say to you?
Well, the response said to me sort of everything. I mean, it hit me right away because, and it's a fortunate thing when this happens, when you're writing, as you know, it hit me right away that this was a key thing to say, because everything that happened then and everything that happened after is a reflection of a negative part of police culture, that is, we are the cops, so we are above the law. We are above recrimination. We are above it. We are the ones in charge. And at that moment, it was also an indication that they're the ones who are going to tell the story. And they did tell that story in the sense that she was the one who was charged, and in their official statements that day, none of the officers, and mind you, there were 3 or 4 other officers involved at all times as well, holding her. Now, not holding her to facilitate an assault, but holding her down while she was being assaulted. None of those officers said anything at the time. None of those officers tried to stop it or said, "Hey, Sarge, back off a bit," or nothing happened. And in their official statements that they write for court, they didn't mention the assault on Emily. So to me, it was like, they're controlling the narrative, they're controlling the story, they're controlling what happens. And it struck me that that was a very significant line. And it is the line that terrifies people, really. You know, I mean, let's say at the start, I have a lot of respect for police and police officers and what they do. And, you know, you and I have met the other side of the law. We've met many criminals, and, you know, we're happy to have police around, but that we are the cops is kind of the moment, the thing we fear. It's like, whoa, no, it's not. That's not what matters here. What matters here is justice, race, basically, right?
And I think important to note, I think, Emily is 24 years old. I think she's 5'2", 120 pounds. These are details that kind of just fill in the size disparity between herself and the sergeant. Tell me about Emily. I think there was probably, fair to say, a path of mistakes and regrets that brought her into police custody that day in 2016. Tell me about her.
For sure. She fully admits that she had been struggling for a while, struggling with some anxiety, but mainly sort of her solution to that anxiety, which is drinking. And she says, I was a blackout drunk. And she said, I got exponentially, crazy, in her words, when I drank. And so she was drinking that night, and there were some incidents she kind of lost track of her friend, and, she was out of control, no doubt about it. And so she comes to this story, and when I approach her, very reluctant to talk at first, because, she feels so guilty. She felt so guilty about her role in this, and she will always acknowledge and bear responsibility for putting herself in the situation of being in the police station, arrested early that morning.
And part of the challenge, and for all reporters, and part of what's so remarkable about your work on this series, is your ability to make her feel comfortable enough that she could talk to you, that she would open up to you. Tell me about that. We've never actually discussed that ever. What was the approach that you used, or how did you do that? How did you convince her to open up to you?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't always work, but I've found that, after I tracked her down and contacted her, I guess I just offered an invitation just to listen, and I made no demands. I did not suggest there'd be a story. I did not suggest there be note taking or recording or anything like that. I said, can we just sit down and have a coffee? That's it. And with no expectations from her, no expectations of a series. I didn't know where it was going to go at that point either. I had heard the audio recording of Sergeant Paquette's guilty plea, so I knew some of the story, but I obviously talked to her. So it just, she was, as I say, very reluctant, but also has a very strong sense of justice. And I just listened, and that first chat was probably an hour and a half or so of just talking with her. She had her boyfriend with her, and they just talked, and it, wandered, and it just, we, over time, we spoke some more, and I asked for more, and she gave more, asked for more, gave more, and I always felt bad. I mean, I always felt like I was going back to the well for information and for her emotions. Like, I knew it was not easy for her at times, but it's basically, I don't know, we had a good connection from the start. And I think because I didn't rush her and I didn't rush the story, she got more and more confident that I was telling the truth, that I was there to listen. I guess that's it. I mean, we've all done it. It's just, you just have to be open and honest and say, I'm just here to listen. And I said to her, at any point in this 5 or 6 conversation, if you want to pull the plug, pull the plug. It's over.
Yeah, and it's interesting. There's just sort of a genuineness to your approach to it, of course, and it's the idea that this is your story. I'm just going to tell it if you'll let me, and it empowers the person. Someone like Emily, I'm sure that's very encouraging for her. It's also interesting too that, and we've discussed this, that when you cover a story that's sort of traumatic for a person, this weird or this unusual bond forms between you and the person you've written about. Not quite friendship, but in some ways more than a friendship, and very strong kind of bond where you want to be fair and you want to tell their story, and they can tell that you want to be fair, and something forms there, right? Like a connection that's very lasting. Like Emily and you would still be in contact now.
Absolutely, we're still in contact, and you're right. It's a strange relationship reporters have with, we use the word sources, which is a basically cold world, and certainly not how I would look upon Emily. I would, I would want to use the word friend, but she may not, because let's face it, our friendship, our relationship, as reporters are with people like this, that they grow to trust and have a bond with, it's based on a tragedy or something, often based on something bad. So
yes,
yeah, you build these relationships with people who have gone through something traumatic, and you're right, you get this very firm bond. Sometimes they fade, these bonds. Sometimes they last decades, sometimes forever. But it's that trust that's built up over time, right? The trust that, and it's over conversations. It's funny, isn't it? It's like, it's just talking and listening. You build up this trust. I mean, it's not like Emily and I went out and, played golf or anything, right? All we did was talk, meet and talk.
yeah. Her lawyer, Craig Mclean, now deceased, of course. There's a hero to me of the 6-part series. It's this defense lawyer, and like when I grew up, I remember hearing people besmirching defense lawyers and stuff, and ambulance chasers and things like that. Defense lawyers are just such a bulwark of a democracy, and they're just such a key part of the system, particularly one that's as skilled as Mclean obviously was. You'd agree with that this is a guy that just exemplifies how the justice system should work?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, defense lawyers are a great asset, generally speaking, to reporters. I mean, the friendly ones are, for sure, and the excellent friendly ones are even better. And he was excellent and friendly. He has this reputation, and when he died, our court reporter Jane Sims did a great obituary on him. He's called the white shark. He would float around the courtroom, and he was just quiet and always he knew what he was going to say. He'd researched, and he really respected his clients, and he hated copying a plea, giving a plea, right? He hated plea bargaining. He hated his clients to come in and say, well, I just want to plead guilty and get this over with. He did not like that, and he did not like that with Emily, and he was stronger than normal, he says, in arguing with her, like, we're not going to accept a plea on this. Something. Right. And he went through a lot. And it's funny, if you listen to him, listen to all the audio recordings of him and going to court, seeking the Crown disclosure, which includes, police statements and fact, documents, and especially the video surveillance. He really wanted that video surveillance. And he just got more and more wry as it went on. As it went on longer and longer, you could just see him, I didn't get to see him, but you could just see him in court kind of shaking his head and kind of grinning, saying, I don't really understand why no one would want to see the video that supposedly shows my client assaulting people, right? And so, and he just fought, and he did not give up, and he charged her a retainer, and I can't remember, not like a small retainer, when she came in, and never collected another penny from her, refused to take a cent from Emily. And he was like that with a lot of other clients. And
that's interesting.
Yeah, so he was the hero, and he fought, and as soon as that video just came out, that surveillance video came out, everything changed. Unfortunately, by then, a brain tumor that had been plaguing Craig had reached a point where he had to be hospitalized. He did not get to actually finish this case, the official parts of it.
And was he alive when your series was published? I kind of have lost the timeline.
No, he died. I interviewed him, and he died about a month or so later. I interviewed him in the palliative care bed at the hospital. He was funny and engaging. He had a pretty good memory. There's some things he couldn't remember. He was, for him, it was basically, the video. You got to get that video. Somehow. And
the quote from him, Randy, was, "I knew it would all be on that video from the police station." So, and that brings me to the third key person obviously in this series, and that's Sergeant Peter Paquette, who, as you said, pleaded guilty to assaulting Emily, kept his job, kept his rank, lost 5 weeks' pay. I don't know, just your thoughts on that.
Well, it's, I had, I reached out to the police and Sergeant Paquette and other officers involved because I wanted to talk to them, obviously.
Mhm.
And so, I'd hope that somebody would speak, and only the police chief or police chiefs, because they changed chiefs, would speak about it to me. Um, and it's, in the hearing, and I wanted to make sure I put this in the story, in his guilty plea hearing, parts of Sergeant Paquette's life were revealed, and it was a hard upbringing, and there were factors in his upbringing that were not, that could have played in this. I can't tell because he didn't talk to me, but so I try to present him in as a sympathetic light as I could, by talking to him. And as far as the penalty, I mean, I won't, I let other people judge that. There's that he pleaded guilty, so he had no criminal conviction on his record, uh, with the conditional sentence he got, the conviction he got. And the Police Service Act is a whole different weird, strange thing where the other officers, for example, who were involved, their conduct was not deemed serious enough to warrant a police act hearing, and the person who decides that is the chief of police. So it's kind of it's very insular. And so then when the Police Service Act hearing comes along and he pleads guilty to it, and it's all the discussions are behind closed doors, and people like us go to these final hearings, and the decisions are made usually, and the punishments are agreed upon beforehand. So it's definitely kind of it seems more like bargaining than anything else.
Right. And to the readers, if the question sort of is, does the punishment fit the crime? And that's actually one of the stories. If you follow that link that's in your chat box, you'll get to the 6-part series, and it's actually about a 13-part series because there are sidebars that you'll be able to link to through the stories. And one of the sidebars asks that exact question, right? And experts were sort of divided. Yes, this is a fair punishment. No, it's not enough. One of the things the judges noted, this is the National Newspaper Awards judges noted, they called you a sympathetic, you're a sympathetic reporter. You are a sympathetic person, you're a good person. I've always thought that. And I'm sure anyone that's worked with you on stories feels that way. Sergeant Paquette did not talk to you. Was that a mistake by him, do you think? Do you think he should have spoken to you? He should have sat down and talked to you? Because he's a police officer, but he's also a human being. And is there some value there in saying, hey, this is part of my life?
As a journalist, yeah, I do believe that that everybody should talk to us. Of course, I will, and I'm not, this is just me, my own personal opinion. I do believe that he should have. I do believe that officers should. I think there's nothing wrong, and it's incredibly good to show your human side. And I think that it would have given him an opportunity to present his human side. And yeah, definitely, I think, and it would have, it became, instead of it, there's all kinds of gray areas in life, and I would have, liked to have heard his explanation. I had, I think, 36 questions ready that I sent to his lawyer at one point, and there were some hard questions. I mean, there have to be some hard questions, right, after what happened. But obviously, the same approach I took to Emily, I would take to him or anybody involved in the story, is just tell me your story. I'm really not here to judge. The only thing that, I mean, especially people, what I do like to weigh judge on, or get other people to weigh judge on, are systems and
right.
and gaps and barriers, those sorts of things, for sure.
The only sort of humanness that was able to come out on the public record was in court. He grew up surrounded by alcoholism, which was very difficult. And it struck me, you had this guy who's grown up to be a police officer, grew up around alcohol, and it's obviously affected you, and that affects kids when they grow up around that. And then you have this young woman, she's struggling with alcohol. So you have this indirect effect of alcohol here, you have this direct effect of alcohol, and these two people on this collision course, and then they collide. The struggle with alcohol is so serious for so many people, and it affects people that are surrounded by it. And it stopped me cold when I read it again last night, and I saw it, and I thought, geez, I wish he would talk to you, because I think there's a human side to this thing, but I digress. I think it's interesting too. I mean, we've been planning this for weeks, and then last week there's this flare-up of protests over policing and abuse of power in the United States. And this case is very different than that. There's no racial component to this, but I just wondered if, while you're watching or reading about the George Floyd death and what's happening in Minnesota and elsewhere, have you had any thoughts on it? Has it sort of got through your head about?
Yeah, and at first, I didn't think much about Emily's case because so much of the U.S. experiences right now are based on race, as you say. But people outside the newsroom started contacting me and saying, there's a culture of police brutality, and in the follow-up demonstrations, I think that's been apparent as well. And so I began to think more and more, and for sure, there's two elements to what's happening in the States, and more than two, but there's race, and this is, as you say, nothing to do with race. And then there is a culture that can breed violence, that can flare up into violence, and people want to call it police brutality. I prefer to say that there's a culture there that can definitely breed it. And and interestingly enough, I talked to Emily about it last night. We communicated, and she I feel bad. I should have reached out to her earlier, but she's actually going through a bit of a hard time right now because of things that are happening in the States right now. And it's kind of bringing back some of the trauma for her, because and people have pointed out to her, said, that of course you were assaulted and you were being, you had pressure on your neck and your head, and there's that parallel, however large or small parallel it is, it's a parallel there, and it's kind of shaking her up. But she is a smart young woman and is insistent on saying, but that's, I had nothing of this was racially motivated, and I do not, and she doesn't want to speak out about it publicly right now because she says, I am not, and she's a white woman, and she said, I'm not going to be thinking that my problems in my life are the same as what happened.
Of course. And for her, in the case of Emily, what happened that day, her wending her way through the courts, the way that it resolved, this whole experience was something of a wake-up call for her, right? Am I right about that?
It is, and it's an interesting thing too, and I want to make sure that was clear in the story as well, that she she was on a downward spiral for sure, and the horror of being assaulted, of being arrested, of putting herself in that situation, the embarrassment of what happened, she has, it affected her deeply, and she says she will never, I don't even know if she can, but she did not watch the video when it was in Craig Mclean's possession. She's horrified by her own actions, and since that day, she has not had a drink since. And and with the support of family and her boyfriend, her life has become so much better. And she's quite willing to admit, it's a very complicated thing, right? It's not like I said, lots of gray areas. On the one hand, she's very angry with police for the assault and angry with police for not stepping in. That part bothers her as much as anything. On the other hand, she recognizes that this incident at the hands of the police also helped turn her life around. Like you say, it was a catalyst for sure.
Amazing. And I have such respect for anybody who struggles with alcohol. Everybody knows someone who struggled with alcohol, or someone in your family or something. And when somebody can turn it around like that and get it under control, it says a lot to me about her that she has been able to do that. It's a remarkable thing for anybody to do, because as I'm sure you've seen in your own life, and I've seen it in people in my life too, it's a very, very difficult thing to live through. So good for her. Randy, I don't want to give you sort of the lightning round, but I'm going to fire some reader questions at you. And again, thank you to everyone for these are some thoughtful questions, some excellent questions, and probably should have thought of them myself, but I'm glad you guys were here. And so just give me your quick lightning round answers on each of that, because I want to get them all in. First question, how cooperative were London police with you in terms of getting information during the reporting of this story?
Well, Well, not very cooperative. I mean, they, to be fair to them, I also did not approach them until I had what I needed, because I was afraid things would be shut down.
Right.
And so I mean, they provided no real information in the sense of they can't talk about the other officers involved. They spoke a little bit about Sergeant Paquette, but really, and they spoke about policies and procedures, not as much as I'd like. It's difficult. It's very difficult. In fact, it's impossible almost to get. Well, you can't look at the policies and procedures of London Police Service. So you don't know what's going on sometimes.
Right.
Mind you, both police chiefs, including the current chief, Steve Williams, spoke to me and gave me plenty of opportunity to speak. There were lots of times when they said they couldn't say anything about it, but they were, courteous and respectful, and gave me lots of opportunity. But I mean, I got very little information from police, and a little bit about sort of what they're doing to make things better. That's pretty well it.
Okay. Reader asks, how do you separate your work from your personal life? The way I interpreted this one was like, you're writing about the police, and then you've always written about these things. I had two when I was reporting, and then you go to your kid's baseball game and your kid's coach is a police officer, for example, right? And like, to me, that is a tough reporter. I'm going to write this story. It's going to be the truth. I'm going to stand beside it, and I'm going to go out in the community. And if you don't like it, I believe in what I do. And how have you always walked that line?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's kind of two parts to that question. It is a good question. I tell you, there's some concern when you write stories like this. There's some concerns when you write stories about people in authority, or people who might get angry, criminals, for example. I just, and I knew there would be a community element to this because there's so many police officers in this city with so many connections. But you know what I try to do? I just try to keep focused on the story and not worry about that. I mean, I made darn sure, and this is an overhype, I'm sure, but I just made sure my car brake lights were working, everything. I just didn't want to have any involvement with anybody. I just wanted to be a very straight, clean citizen for the duration of this and for afterwards. It's, as you know, stories like this kind of take over your personal life. So you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and go, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? And a million things, from will the competition get this story to am I being fair to am I being too easygoing? So it's hard, and there's but as you said, in the smaller the place, and you and I both work in small places, the smaller the place, and London's fairly small, the harder it is to avoid the impact on the community and the community responding to you. I mean, as you say, we're out and about, and people will come up to us and say, well, that story was terrible, or that story was great. And I have some friends with the police officer friends, and I heard about it afterwards a bit, but that goes with the territory, right?
Of course, and good for you for being able to sort of just accept that goes with the territory. I agree with you totally. Here's an interesting question from a reader. Do you feel London police are better, worse, or the same as other Canadian police forces, and then compare them to police in the United States?
Wow. Okay, that's a challenging question for sure. Let's deal with Ontario and Canada. It's every police force seems to have these spates of things come to the surface of assaults or improper investigations. And it's very, very difficult, unfortunately, to compare how your police forces, say, compared to Ottawa's or Toronto's or Waterloo's, because it's very difficult to find out information on your own force lots of time. As I say, we'll never hear of what happens to most disciplinary hearings. Unless they reach the level where the chief says they're public, then we don't hear about it. And then you've got to go to other police forces to see. There's no sort of central accounting. Other media have tried as well in Ontario to find out, to kind of compare. So it's difficult. I wouldn't suggest they're any better or any worse. I think there's some very good people there, and I respect some of the leadership there for sure. Definitely, though, I have to say that, and I've heard from retired police officers after the series, some saying, this was a one, and doesn't happen very often, and some saying it happens more than you think. That's the problem. That's one of my big problems, is we don't know. But compared to the States, boy, I have to say, I certainly respect and appreciate, although it's, in my opinion, flawed and could be improved, the training that police officers in this country get. I mean, so look at Ontario. I mean, I've been down to the police college. I've spoken to police officers down there as part of their media training. They're, you know, they're young and enthusiastic and they're eager and they're interested in becoming good police officers. And, you know, you're gonna get some bad officers, and you're gonna get the culture of of some police departments affecting them. But I mean, I find that the level of education and the level of training, I assume it's higher than in the States. I don't know. I mean, our forces have never been tested like they are down there, but I would hope they don't react like that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think what was so powerful about the series, again, Randy, and your reporting in general, you don't torque things up, you don't embellish, and part of the reason is because you don't have to, because your reporting skills are so refined that you can just assemble the facts and they sort of speak for themselves. And particularly with this series, I think if this really affected, I think the chief of police was affected when he read it. I think a lot of people were affected when they read it. Part of what was so effective was just the way you just played it so straight, because it was just fact. And what's your sort of philosophy on reporting in that sense, in terms of not embellishing and torquing up stories, but just here are the facts? What's your sort of philosophy generally on that?
Well, it's changed over time, or like at least the practice has changed over time, in that I used to embellish more. I've kind of pared down my writing. It may just be that I'm getting lazier. I just don't want to embellish so much. I just, you know, I find the more I write, the more I realize that the people's stories are far more important than my embellishments. I'm here to give them voice, and I'm here to see what systems are not working, and you don't need a lot of embellishment. We kind of took a risky lead with this, and that is that once upon a time lead, and that was a bit, you know, somebody might think that was a bit harsh, but I wanted to draw people's attention in right away to the sort of the fairy tale nature of what was being said versus what actually happened. So that was kind of the only embellishment I put, or the most creative I got, I guess. And then it's just, you know, then it's just telling the story. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things happening in this story that it didn't need me to get in the way, basically.
I think too that for a newspaper our size to publish a series of this scope, pretty unusual, pretty rare, and I think it's terrific. It speaks, of course, to your skill and your ability. It speaks to maybe the culture of the newsroom too. You can be freed up for a month or two to focus on a project, and if somebody else has to do some extra work during a specific day to fill the well for the next day's newspaper, they're happy to do it. I think it works. But where do you see newspapers our size and newspapers in general going in terms of these major projects? Clearly, they can still be done. You did one.
Yeah.
Are they endangered?
I think they're in danger for sure. We have an excellent culture in our newsroom, which I can't wait to get back to someday, rather than just being on phones all the time. As you say, you know, when I get freed up to do something like this, other reporters are working hard, doing daily beat stories and daily stories on and on. And, you know, I've gotten to this point a bit because of my age and because I've done it, but I see in our newsroom staff other people doing the same thing. I see lots of projects on the go, again, wiped out a bit by COVID, but there's a sense still in our newsroom we want to excel, let's face it. And I think that's true in other newsrooms as well. It does get harder as it gets smaller. I know there's lots of, there's, you know, cooperative efforts going on between schools, journalism schools, and between news media. That's one way, but I mean, it's going to get more and more difficult because, I mean, the paper I started at, as daily, is gone in Aurelia. Other papers are shrunk, so even the small sort of investigative work that happened at those papers is gone. But it can exist as long as there's a culture, as long as there's people at the top and all the way through who want it to happen. It will happen. We will make time. The London Free Press will always, you know, I shouldn't say always, but for the foreseeable future, will make an effort. And we have a culture of freeing people up and stepping in when there's something big going on. Someone's got something big.
And
So that's,
part of that culture too is recognizing the big story when you see it. It's a challenge too, right? So, so I'll say to the dozens of people who are signed in here, thank you for joining us. And like Randy said, you know, as newsrooms evolve and journalism evolves and media evolves, the best thing we can ask you is just read our stories. That's the support that will keep us going and keep us through it. And if you haven't yet read We Are the Cops, again, that link is in the chat box. That should be right in front of you. So Randy, thanks so much for your time. And to everyone who joined us today, thank you so much. So again, this has been LFP Live Behind the Story with Randy Richmond. And we're so grateful to you for joining us. And thanks very much. Thanks, Randy.
you're welcome. My pleasure.
Take care, all.